Hello friends, welcome to the Weekly Waffle. This is something new that I want to try, something very informal, very casual that I just want to give a go as something new, potentially episodic, to see what you think. So just down here to the side of me, I've got a laptop, and on that laptop are some notes for a topic that I want to have a little chat about. And the purpose is not for me to decide anything, but it's to ask you, the community, a question about a particular thing in the world of mini painting. And I've just remembered I've got an extra light there that I can turn on, and I definitely should turn on because lighting is important for good quality video. There we go, professional. So the idea is to get a conversation going. It's I will pose a topic, I will say a few things about it, what I think about it, and then we can use the comments to have a chat about this topic, to explore it further. For the first one, something that's been on my mind a lot recently, and this is not unrelated to the fact that I've just filmed a video, and in fact I don't know when they're going to come out, but you'll notice I'm actually wearing this t-shirt in the video. I've just filmed a video about COcast, a new thermoplastic soft resin that is being billed as revolutionary to the miniatures industry. It's potentially a very important material. So resin's been on my mind a lot recently, and that's made me want to talk about traditional hard cast resin. I think it's acrylic-based resin, right? And the question I want to ask is it fit for purpose? And was it ever fit for purpose? So I guess that kind of requires you to have some opinions on what the purpose of a miniature is, right? But we'll try and use just some sort of generalisations that I think most folk can agree on, and that should give us a good jumping off point to start a conversation. So when, I apologise as well, I'm probably going to accidentally bump this lav mic. I'm still not used to wearing it, so this is another new addition to the channel. So when hard cast resins first came about, there was definitely a purpose to them. They were a bit sharper than metal in terms of the detail that they could render. They were certainly sharper than what hard plastics could do back then, but they were a bit more expensive to produce than both metal or plastic miniatures at the time, because those processes had existed for a long time. And so what that meant is that when resin first came about, it was kind of marketed as a premium product. And I get why that was necessary. You know, it cost more to manufacture, so regardless of its shortcomings, it's gonna cost more to the end user, and that means it kind of has to be marketed as a premium product. But should it have been? That's kind of the question. What were the trade-offs? Air bubbles were a big one. Early resin stuff, you know, fine cast and early Forge World, and even early stuff from smaller third-party companies, was notoriously a nightmare for air bubbles and mould slips. Those were the two things it was far more prone to than any other material. You just wouldn't really see air bubbles in hard plastic like styrene type kits and things like that. And in metal miniatures, again, mould slips occasionally, but certainly not air bubbles. It just didn't really happen. And the thing was, you know, hard plastics were kind of the de facto choice for Games Workshop back then, because they had the infrastructure to afford to set up to manufacture them. Chinese mass production wasn't as much of a thing back then. It was barely a thing at all back then. So, you know, small indie companies and anyone that basically wasn't Games Workshop pretty much had to go with metal or resin. That was what they could afford to make miniatures from. And so, you know, there was certainly a bit of a discrepancy there, because not everyone had access to hard plastic. So GW marketing resin as a super high-end product maybe didn't quite align as much necessarily with smaller third-party companies where it was just their product. But then I guess also smaller third-party companies really have only started to get a decent voice in the internet age, so maybe that just wasn't something we noticed as much back then. What is my next point? So yeah, times have changed now. Things have moved on a lot. The internet has changed the way we buy products. Chinese mass production has changed the way that products are made. And all of this has kind of forced a technology arms race, which is why new things like COcast are starting to appear now. And as times have changed, standards have changed with them. What is overall the baseline standard for a miniature nowadays to be considered decent is very different. It's not the same thing it used to be. So, you know, Forge World have definitely, they've improved on infantry-sized and approximately infantry-sized pieces, you know, sort of 30 to 50 mil. We'll say Space Marine to Dreadnought size. That stuff has all got a lot better. And why has it got a lot better? Well, I don't really know what they've done to the process to improve it, but air bubbles and mould slips are definitely far less common. And the material is definitely not the same material that it was back in the fine cast era, back in the early days. When you work with models from those periods, it's very immediately obvious that the current resin that Forge World uses is not the same. So the material's changed, the process has probably been optimised more, and as such, the resin itself has got better. But when we get to those larger Forge World pieces, and in fact this actually is true from other companies too, I don't want it to sound like I'm just blaming Forge World for this problem, but when we get to those larger pieces, we see all of the old problems coming back, and they are more pronounced than ever. Mould slips are still a huge problem. I built a Sikaran the other day, it was probably a couple of weeks ago now, and the mould slipping on that was just awful. Bubbles, again, huge problems with bubbles. Also little chunks of silicon that get stuck in the resin as it cures. It sort of seems to like pinch a piece of the mould and then it takes it with it. And when the resin is removed from the mould, it grabs a little bit of the silicon. So you get these little chunks of silicon inside your miniature when you start, you know, sanding and scraping away. And it's always around mould lines for some reason. It's always around areas you need to sand and scrape, and you'll see them in there, and they're very clearly rubber. I know Pleasant Kenobi spoke about this probably at least a month ago now, and he had some pretty serious problems. And I think it was the Orc Megaboss on the Warbike, the Forge World one. I think that was the model that gave him particular issues. So across the board, it's still happening. There's also the Squidmar video that went up very recently to when I'm recording this. You've probably seen it with the, is it the Manta, the big towel flyer that's like the size of a fucking washing machine. It's huge. That thing, again, he had nightmares of it, you know. In the thumbnail I know there was a part that was bent like that and it was supposed to be straight, so that's telling you the level of issues there are. And one of the things we need to sort of think about there is how much of that is what we should consider quality control problems, and are Forge World do they just have really low standards for quality control when we consider the rest of the industry? And again, that's a hard one for me to answer. I've had problems with bubbles and mould slips from Victoria Miniatures, Raging Heroes. There's definitely third-party resin companies where I've had big serious issues, but to the point of like warped parts and chunks of mould inside the resin, that's a Forge World problem. That's not something I've ever seen elsewhere, and it's not something I've ever heard of elsewhere. So I don't know whether that's maybe a limit to my experience. But I feel like perhaps Forge World are the most sort of popular, big, known name for this particular thing. And that might be a problem because I feel like maybe their quality control standards are far below what they should be. They are willing to let warped pieces go out. They are willing to let mould slipped pieces go out. They are willing to let pieces with chunks of silicon in them go out. And you could say they're a big company, things get missed, but these problems are so common. If they're a big company and things get missed, that probably says something needs to be tightened up somewhere, right? Quality control needs to improve, or the prices need to come down to reflect that it's no longer a premium product. And that's kind of the point I'm trying to get onto here, is that is it reasonable to sell that product to a customer in 2021? And is it reasonable to still look at it as a premium product? Is that still what it is? Give me a second, I just need to go and get my coffee. There we go. Coffee. So yeah, is it still reasonable to consider it that in 2021? Well, let's look at the rest of the market in 2021. Let's look at how much times have changed. Hard plastics have closed the gap, or not completely. Resins and metal are still definitely capable of crisper detail than hard plastic. I mean, you know, I'm an Infinity player. I know firsthand what metals can do. The surface detail on an Infinity model is far beyond anything that hard plastic can ever do. And that's metal, you know. So hard plastic has definitely caught up a lot, but it's still not completely there. But then, you know, metal can still rival it for detail. Metal doesn't have the, like, the sanded particles when you file metal, they're heavy, so they just kind of fall, whereas with resin, they're light, so like a toxic dust can go up into the air. That can be a problem. Softer resins like CO Cast, which either before or after this, I'm not sure how the release order is going to work out, but we'll be talking about CO Cast in a lot more detail. But it's superior in terms of not trapping bubbles. It captures detail just as well. It doesn't mold slip as easily. You know, again, that's definitely better. Even 3D printables they're catching up. They're getting so much better, and pretty much everything is cheaper or the same sort of production costs as resin. So is there still any point to it? Is hard cast resin, as we think of it, the traditional resin, miniature resin, is it still relevant? Is there still a point to it? Does it belong in the hobby anymore? I mean, I know full well that a bunch of people want to see Forge World go all plastic. I know that that's a very popular opinion. So I feel like the customer doesn't want the product anymore. But the manufacturers must be selling it, or they wouldn't keep selling it. So I'm trying to figure out who's going wrong and who doesn't understand what here, because the product is obviously still selling, but the product is also obviously not something people actually want, because everyone prefers every alternative to it, as far as I can see. What was next on my list? So, yeah, the other thing is, when we talk about that idea of still selling it as a premium product, unlike every other material, hard cast resin asks for much more time, skill and knowledge investment than anything else. That's a problem, because what essentially ends up boiling down to is that companies that sell this product are expecting their customers to essentially carry out extensive repair work to their product, filling in bubbles, fixing mold slips, straightening out warped products, all of these things. That is extensive repair work to a broken product, and it's being marketed to us, A, as a premium product, and B, that's as part of the hobby. That's something we're supposed to want. It makes it more advanced, more prestige. You're a hobbyist of higher pedigree if you engage with this much harder to use material. And I struggle to see it that way. To me, I don't see it's an elite, higher end, harder to use advanced material. I see it isn't fit for purpose, and things like hard styrene-based plastics, CO cast softer resins, and metal are far superior at achieving their goals as miniature manufacturing materials. So I'm trying to figure out where everybody else stands on this, and that's why I thought it'd be a great first one as a question. So as we come up to the 15-minute mark now, and I want to wrap this video up, I want to try and keep these around 15 minutes. So the questions are, is there still a place for it? Is the product still relevant? Does it still matter? Should we still be buying it? Should we be demanding better quality than what resin gives us? Should we be saying, no, it's not acceptable to have mold slips, air bubbles and warped parts? Should we be putting our foot down? And should it still be viewed as a prestige or premium product? Or is that something that we've just had hammered into us over the years and we accept even though it's not really true anymore? So what do you think? Let's talk about it in the comments, and let's get a conversation going. Let's talk about resin and figure out where the hell it is and what the hell it's all about. So folks, thank you for joining me for this first one. It's it's going to be a bit different. This is an attempt at a new series. As with anything series-based, it doesn't carry on unless you want it to carry on. So if you like it, let me know in the comments. If you think this is a good premise for a series, to have a chat about a thing in the hobby and then take it to the comments each week. I really want to make this series. I think it's fun and it's a nice, not too stressful, not too pressured video for me to make. I can be a lot more informal, I can be a lot more loosely scripted, and I can just kind of go off the cuff and say what I think. So I really like the idea of it, but do you like it? Do you want it? Do you want more of it? So those are some questions for you. Let's have some fun with it, and I will see you all in the comments. Thanks a lot, folks.